Attention crew, this is your Captain Caliban speaking. This is a supplemental episode of Enterprising Individuals, where we bring you news and tidbits from the world of Trek, also interviews with special guests, and a few little surprises along the way. I hope that you are healthy wherever you are, and you're keeping busy. I know I'm trying to turn this forced sabbatical from the outside world into an opportunity to create more content. I've been working on new Patreon content, and we of course have a lot of other shows on the Just Enough Trope network that we hope are keeping you entertained during these strange times. My partner and co-host on the Just Enough Trope podcast and I have started a new feature called Co-Videos, where we're using the quarantine to scratch off some items on that movies I always wanted to see but never have list. Some of them are out-and-out classics that just passed us by, and some are weird personal picks, and we watch them and talk about them and give our impressions on them. That comes out on the usual Just Enough Trope show feed, and we're doing a couple of those every week. So if you want to check those out, you can subscribe to us at Just Enough Trope on your listening platform of choice, or check out our Twitter at Just Enough Trope if you want to take that journey with us. Today on the show, Dr. David A. Banks is back to talk, well, everything, really. David's work focuses on the intersections of digital networks, urban form, and structures of power, and we were supposed to talk about the rights of AI and digital beings, like Data or the ones that we see in Star Trek, and specifically Star Trek Picard, but as you can guess, our talk ended up straying into current events. Much of David's work focuses not just on the internet and the data that we generate and the governments and corporations that collect it, but also the ways in which that data is implemented, or often not, in providing the services that we take for granted in times of normalcy and the ones that we rely on in times of crisis, like right now. We do get to Star Trek and AI and the rise of the robots eventually, but first we start off talking about the coronavirus pandemic and how we're coping with it in the digital age, and it's a fascinating and I hope enriching discussion. And it's a long one. I love talking to Dave, and we certainly made it last, so this is where I leave you. But if you've got comments or something you want to add to the conversation, please do by going to @EISTpod on Twitter or the Enterprising Individuals Facebook page and join in the discussion. You can also help the show grow by going to patreon.com/EISTPOD and becoming a crew member of the show. And as always, if you like what you hear, tell a friend. That's it for me. Enjoy my conversation with Dr. Banks. I'll see you next week. Go easy on the toilet paper. And with that, let's get underway. Back on the show with me today is Dr. David A. Banks. David is a visiting assistant professor of geography and planning at the University at Albany. He's also the co-editor of Cyborgology and co-chair of the Theorizing the Web conference. And he's the co-host of the Ironweeds podcast. David, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me.
It's great to have you back. Tell me about the Ironweeds podcast.
Oh, wow. Thank you. Yeah. So my wife, Brittany, and our good friend, Chris, the three of us cover politics and news and culture, mostly from an upstate perspective, upstate New York, that is, where we live. And, we're trying to make something that was sort of irreverent, funny, but topical and substantive, talking about like real issues and in politics and current events, and we have a good time doing it.
That's great. It seems like there are more podcasts than ever.
There are,
and yeah, and not to just say that right after you tell me that you've got a new podcast, but do you see that ever stopping or slowing? From your position of somebody who looks at the web and information exchange.
Yeah. There'll probably be like a pruning back eventually, I imagine. I don't, but this would be a time of just like a lot of experimentation. And then I'm sure if it's like any other kind of media form, there will be like a corporate buyout of a lot of that stuff. There'll be consolidation, not like my or your podcast will probably get bought by Comcast or something like that. It's probably maybe that could happen, but for the most part, I think you'll just see corporate actors trying to fill out the space.
Yeah,
I'd imagine that would happen. And a lot of cultural consumption habits shift in times of crisis. So Probably in the next month or two, next couple months, we'll find out just how much podcasts hang on.
What the different paradigm is going to be.
Yeah.
So many podcasting hosts, offer free options, and it seems to be sort of piecemeal or catch as catch can. And I could totally see, if they ever get hip to it, a corporate parent sort of sweeping in and buying up SoundCloud or Podbean or whatever it is, so that you're getting your free 10 hours a month from Comcast or whatever the conglomerate is.
Yeah, I think you already see that a little bit with like Stitcher has a premium service, and Spotify both have these like exclusive shows for them. I think there's a whole company that does that, like Luminary, I think it's called, something like that. Where I don't think it's necessarily like 100% a bad thing if like people who are making this stuff like makes an okay amount of money doing it. Like that's good. I would probably rather it not be like one of the same four companies that make everything now, but I don't know.
It seems like the type of self-expression that happens with podcasts now is just part of the DNA of the newest generations. When I go to Starbucks, and there's a girl just shaking her ass for TikTok or whatever because she just got the notion to do that. It seems like that kind of person is going to grow up and go to college or something like that and then go, well, I could do a podcast about this or that. And I don't know. I think that that's really good. I think that democratization of people's self-expression is a good thing.
Yeah, no, I think it is too. And, like there's a really good term that a colleague of mine, Crystal Abaddon, uses called I think it's called tactical frivolity or strategic frivolity. I don't quite remember which one, but the idea of using frivolousness, like shaking your ass for TikTok, like using those things that seem frivolous for your own ends or for a collective ends is happening a lot, and I don't even know if we even notice it. Notice what's happening in the moment. With that kind of thing, and then
you never do.
You find out eventually that I don't know, someone who seemed inconsequential suddenly becomes very important, like certain reality TV stars.
Yeah, sure, yeah. And thinking about the fact that 50, 60 years ago, your only chance to communicate through mass media was just waving and saying "Hi, Mom," in TV interview or something like that in the background, and now people can build their own sort of little personal empires doing this sort of thing. As you and I are both trying to do.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm all for it. We live in interesting times currently. I don't have to tell you, and everybody's stuck inside, and many gatherings and events are being canceled because of that. Does that include theorizing the web?
It does. Yeah. We rescheduled fairly early. We saw it kind of coming down the pike, and we rescheduled for October. So really hope things find some semblance of normal in October. The dates are escaping me at this moment, but it's in early October now.
Theorizing the Web is about the internet, and it takes place in large part on the internet with people attending remotely, but it's got to be a huge pain still to move an entire live event.
Yeah, we thought about what it would take to make Theorizing the Web a completely online event, and one thing that we just kind of kept coming up against was like, would you want to go to that? Even if you were like able to technically solve every single glitch and it came off flawless, would you like spend 2 full days in front of your computer screen watching other presentations and I don't think I would want to go to that, which then tells you something about like what a conference is really about, and like what media actually captures and what it doesn't. And so we came to the conclusion that it would just be best to postpone it. But at the same time, because we're a bunch of theory nerds and media theory nerds specifically, we realize that like that's something interesting about the medium too, that there's something more than the sum of its parts meeting in like a in-person physical space like that.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, it's good to get the meet together every once in a while.
Yeah,
and not just go fully digital. Well, yeah, I know that there's a lot of like comic conventions that are being canceled, and they're trying this sort of virtual thing as well, which of course leaves out the huge sub-economy of vendors and artists and people who a large part of their yearly income is them selling items and doing sketches and things like that. And so then you're also seeing people organize online sales or like virtual stores or sort of markets where people can go and support their artists and stuff like that. So it's fascinating to see the system, the internet or what have you, sort of take the weight of some of this stuff that we usually do, in real space as it is.
Yeah. I've already gotten records saying this is going to be the golden age of the group chat.
Good.
I don't want to make it seem like there's always like the digitally mediated conversation is always less than the in-person one. I'd be the last person to argue that, but so it's going to be interesting to see what is better done either through some sort of text medium or over real-time video chat or something like that, because someone's going to find something that works really well, but of course it's not going to be just taking what you do in person and doing it in front of a camera. Like that's obviously not going to be the best thing, because like the technology affordances are going to be different, but someone's going to come up with something really interesting, I think, in this time. And I can't wait to really see what that is.
Well, speaking of which, as an instructor, how has social distancing affected your teaching duties?
Oh, just all of it. We stopped, let's see, last week was spring break, and then the week before that, I had actually, I felt kind of a cold coming on, and I have traveled to China in January. Oh. So I was like, nope, I'm not leaving the house anymore. I actually got one of the few COVID-19 tests, which are really unpleasant. They always talk about testing, but they don't say what the actual test is. It's where they stick a long Q-tip like straight back in through your nasal cavity.
Oh,
man.
It's
and they do it twice, and it's no fun. But I already kind of I haven't been into my classroom or the campus for like a week and a half, maybe 2 weeks now. Yeah. And it's been okay, like a lot. Really, the going the mantra that everyone's going by is be understanding of everyone else's life that is in chaos right now, and let's just all try to learn as much as we can in this weird time, both in and out of the classroom, and let's just make it happen as best we can.
Yeah, well, that's the only thing that you can do, I guess.
Yeah.
Well, it's great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
And we were scheduled to talk about artificial intelligence in the Star Trek universe today, particularly how it is seen and explored in Star Trek Picard, which we'll do. But, I mean, I think we'd be fools to not want to talk about what's going on in our world right now during our plague year, such as it is.
Yeah.
And we've talked previously on the program about the idea of big data and the way that corporations are using data to get a new picture of their users and the movements of their users through the world. And I'd have to imagine that hopefully during this crisis, we can use that data the right way, or beneficial actors can use the data to contain the spread of COVID or to get treatment where it's supposed to go.
Yeah. I mean, I would hope that's the case. There's always, of course, the fact that like there's just an underproduction of a lot of those, either whether they be tests or ventilators or masks or something like that. I'm not an expert in any of that, but it seems like there's not enough to go around, or we can't physically get them to where they need to go. I do think that like there's something about. Actually, I'd rather pose it as a question. It's like, I wonder if when we compare COVID-19 to like say the Spanish flu of 1918, a little over 100 years apart, are we going to see some sort of like better rapid response through the use of information? Usually, I think it's the case that we overstate like how useful these sorts of things are. But I hope that they're easy, that they do something. we put so much of our research dollars into this stuff. I hope that they provide some sort of return on how to fight such a distributed problem like a pandemic.
Yeah, and from the perspective of like informatics, when you've got a state like West Virginia, it's like, we don't have any cases. And it's not a question of not having cases. It's a question of not having tests and not having the information about who has it. So think what you will about our current administration and government, but even if they were going to make positive, good decisions without that information, the decision is just not going to be tailored to the problem.
Yeah, right. And whenever we... I've been watching The Blacklist lately, which is, obviously not Star Trek, right?
Yeah.
It's almost the opposite. But I've been noticing they have I've noticed how many episodes they have about bioweapons and contagions. Huh. But that just shouts out every single time that happens now. But also how often the whole episode, the fulcrum of it is about we know XYZ, so therefore, the inductive reasoning, the Sherlock Holmes sort of stuff about therefore, the bad guy's over there. And just I just think about all the different steps of we have this information, we know, for example, there's one scene where there's they're looking for someone that has some sort of I think it was a bioweapon, or they released it with an airplane. And they're like, okay, well, we have 9 places where Cessnas within the range of the site, could be housed in a building. And I'm thinking about God, we don't have a database of the size of buildings and the registry. Right. We don't know in real time where every single small aircraft is. All of these things, it feels like we know it because we're saturated by information all the time. But there's actually tons and tons of data that we still don't have in real time, let alone at all, And I think, or at least I hope, that some of this, if there's maybe a handful of good things that, or at least clarifying things that come out of this pandemic, it's how much stuff we still really don't know and we don't have real time data on, and how much that data isn't just magically produced through having a cell phone in your pocket, that a lot of that data is bad or incorrect or incomplete in some important way, and that we actually need to put effort into things like the census, where you have where it's old school. You have a person go to your door, ask you these questions, that sort of thing. Which I'll just end by saying that the census is a good place to start looking at big data information sort of gathering practices, because we actually built most of our main IBM computers. Some of the very first computers that eventually turned into IBM were made for the census.
Oh, okay.
They were because we were getting to America was growing so fast that we were still counting the last census when it was time to start the next one, 10 years later. Sure. So they're like, oh, we got to find a better way to count this faster. And so you got the punch card tabulating machines. So, hopefully we get some sort of breakthrough, a punch card tabulating machine that we can real time look at spread of disease and stuff like that.
Yeah, you were talking about having access to how tall buildings are and stuff like that, and you always think about that happening in these cyber shows, but it's really just a few years ago there would be a thing where you would have to call somebody, hey, look up the plans for something, and then you'd have one of your side agents go to the city administration building or something like that in the basement, and then they look at the blueprints and say, clearly there's a secret room here, or you've got to go
right.
three doors to the left or something like that. But somebody somewhere scanned all that online now, and it's all virtually represented in this other world. Is Blacklist is James Spader's got like a list of bad guys, right?
Yes, that's pretty much it. Okay. Yeah, he himself is a bad guy, and he's like double crossing a bunch of people, and like you never know which side everyone is on. I actually see it as closer to like if like the X-Files met like the Bourne Identity or something. It's like a mix of those two things. I really just watch it. I watch it to watch James Spader chew the scenery.
Well, you don't have to apologize to me.
No,
I might check it out. It sounds kind of interesting.
No, I love watching James Spader be like a weirdo, and that's what draws me to it all the time.
What always gets me is how much crises like this, stress test the structures that we have in place, and how, you always hear that everybody is going to predict everything. Not every threat is necessarily credible, but how people have talked about how our healthcare system isn't ready for this. Our networks and our computing systems aren't ready for this. And we're already seeing companies, capitalist companies being asked to reduce their bandwidth and reduce, the services that they give in order to keep our network from crashing or from having problems. And something that really got me was it's just mind-blowing how quickly a primary can be canceled. Like it's, like that our democracy is just paper thin and can just be torn down almost immediately. And the fact that, you're talking about punch cards, just having some system, some backup to take care of, if the voting machines go down or if there is some kind of a disease outbreak and we can't go to the polls, and we're just not ready for that. Yeah,
we're really not. And the I forgot which essay it is, but in one of his many essays, like maybe this might have been almost a decade old now, anthropologist David Graeber made this point that there are, how many ATMs are there out in the world, right? It's got to be millions, right?
Yeah.
And how many times have you ever heard an ATM machine spitting out the wrong amount of money?
Yeah.
These things work like 99 out of 100 times exactly the way that they're supposed to. They actually control like pretty complicated transactions. I can now do all of that from my phone, including deposit checks by taking a picture of it. You can do all these things with banking that has to be very, very secure, and you have to know that it's like identify the person, verify identities, and all that stuff. We can do all of those. This is technically possible, it seems, to do all of these things. But voting, we just seem to not be able to do. Anything that has to do with the maintenance of democracy or social reproduction, right? The idea that reproducing the society with younger people as older people die, that's not none of that really seems to be showing up, and that's disturbing.
Do you one more question about this sort of thing, and then I promise we'll get to track. Do you see the kind of collection of data that companies just do by rote now, just data points that we wouldn't even think exist? Do you see that as like a violation or like an inherently bad thing? I've been seeing a lot of just reporting and stories and books recently about things, the idea of like surveillance capitalism, where they're just taking our stuff. There's no consent. We haven't agreed to give them these points of data and are using it. Like, do you think that it's just like, we just can't trust capitalism? Capitalism is just being capitalism, even if it's cyber capitalism. And so we should be wary of this, and we should try to I don't know how we're going to in this society, but like try to take our data back or keep them from sort of spying on us in that way.
Okay, there's a couple things there, right? So one, we have a lot of fun treats, right? We have lots of fun stuff that we can use and play with.
For a treat,
yeah. Like Instagram, Snapchat. I just started a Discord server. I love these things. I think they're a bunch of fun.
Yeah.
What we are also realizing, though, is that they are expensive to run, right? And they're not just like ephemeral code that can be deployed with no effort, right? There's actually quite a bit of like physical stuff that has to work correctly, and people that have to do real work and wake up every day and turn on the server. A lot of stuff that actually needs to get done in order to make all that stuff happen. And the only way that you can get the resources and the money to make that happen is to convince a handful of people that already have all of the money to shed off some for you. And really the only mechanisms that we have to do that are schemes, and I'll use the word schemes, that are likely to pay off better than a healthy index fund, right? When the markets are healthy, like an index fund, you just put it, some money into like the S&P 500 or whatever. You're gonna get, or like an index fund at the New York Stock Exchange, you'll get like 12%. You got to get something that is going to beat that. Otherwise, no investor cares, right? And so you'll get these either moonshot opportunities where every single social media company has to grow like Facebook, where it's just like meteoric rise, or it's nothing. And all of these companies also have to tend toward monopoly, because competition is actually not so great with these things. Because when it comes to social, like social media, you want all of your friends in one place. You don't want to go to different apps to do different things with different people necessarily. Yeah. So there's like this really strong tendency toward monopoly. And so I'm the way that everything is structured, I don't think like if you wanted something other than capitalism or data, this privacy destroying data collection, I think is really kind of baked into the way that we use all this stuff, right? All these treats. I think it is pretty deeply baked in. And so like if we wanted something radically different or something more egalitarian, cooperative, or however you want to characterize it, I think it might need, it's going to need to look and act a little bit differently. And I've really, that topic has haunted me, and it's also like really, really wide open. And I think that's why it haunts me, is because like I don't really know what that would look like, or if I would even like it. Like, would I want to like, I don't know, like spend half an hour volunteering at my local data center so that I can gain access to Snapchat or something? Yeah, right. like that's like, I would like you laughed, I would laugh, right? Like that sounds weird, but like I don't even know if is that what I want? Is that better? I don't know. It's like I think we're really hitting at these contradictions of capital, where we have this bountiful amount of I have the most music anyone could ever connect to, and I have all this media, but like how does it get paid for? Where does the value come from? Is all very ephemeral and confusing. And we're really just starting to realize like how many things need to happen and change in order to get all that.
Yeah, and like it just, as you know, as a content creator, I'm sure you know like what content is really worth. And music companies, for years were ready to die on the hill of every single song was, a unique special snowflake, and only recently have come around to, fine, just pay $15 a month for it or whatever, and we'll just get it that way.
And then all these
leaving the artists out in the process.
Right, yeah. And then there's all these weird incentives that start popping up that are range from perverse to good, right? Where if I'm, say, a musician, which I'm not, but if I were, and I wanted to get big, I would try to craft a song that would fit into like one of Spotify's really big playlists, right?
Sure.
And you wouldn't necessarily be purely driven by the kind of music you would want to make. You want to be able to be the perfect puzzle piece into a whole that you've identified. And that's sort of always been the case in a lot of ways, but there's something maybe approaching a categorical difference with like how finely tuned all of these different media streams are.
Yeah. The smartphone is such it's such a strange device, and it's like I think the closest you could get to mental telepathy with whoever's paying attention than anything else. Like the fact that like without them, I walk around and I go, I wonder how tall Ben Franklin was, or I wonder, how much kumquats are at the store. And now I can immediately know. And then anybody who has access to what I'm doing, you could do this with a PC as well, but it's just even more convenient with the smartphone, can immediately know that about me, that I'm thinking about kumquats. Any other industry in the world, they're all trying to do this as well. Like when I go to Cub and they want to offer, Cub is a grocery store in my area. If they want to offer me a discount card or whatever, they're doing that so they know that I, Aaron Coker, bought kumquats,
right? And
then they can get more kumquats or try to sell me kumquats or whatever. But the fact that the smartphone, your ISP or your service provider or whatever just has all that information, it's just, I don't know, it's weird. And like I think like you, I've got, I think, kind of a pragmatic view on it, but when you think about the scope of that data, it does blow me away sometimes.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking about, and this kind of blends into some of the conversations we've had more specifically about Star Trek. Is that even if you want to think the worst about a lot of the social media as like a tool of surveillance, as much of your social being is mediated through these technologies, like that's how much more of yourself anyone can monitor if they want to, right?
Yeah.
And if you just want to believe that like that's all that's happening all the time, then like that's a lot of information that we are realizing is even harder to parse than we originally thought.
Yeah.
And to some degree, I kind of throw my hands up to all this and be like, if the government can or a corporation can like ruin my life as soon as it wants to, so I might as well keep using this stuff to the degree that it helps me until it doesn't. He's like, is so much of the nature of all this is that like it's indeterminable. Like I don't know how, like what my actions are going to, what sort of consequences my actions are going to produce, because as I'm sitting in front of my, two glowing computer screens talking to you, I have all sorts of stuff flying by right now, and I have no idea who's intercepting what I'm saying to you right now. It's really hard to connect action to consequence now, and that really changes how people act in general whether they know they're being viewed or not.
Yeah, and just because I'm searching for Ben Franklin doesn't mean I want Hamilton tickets or whatever it is. Like there isn't a correlation necessarily. Yeah,
it sometimes I find myself getting embarrassed or frankly offended by some of the ways that some of the things that algorithms think I want. Yeah. Like, what the hell did I do that made them think that I wanted to watch Ellen? Like, what's going on? Like,
yeah.
All I'm not that person.
All YouTube videos need a preface or just like a 10-second summary or something like that, because they've got this deal where you got to click on it to know what's in there, and once I click on it, you immediately add it to my algorithm or whatever, and it's like, no, didn't you notice that I clicked away 10 seconds later because I didn't want to watch this? Yeah.
No, that was ironic. I actually hate this.
I was supposed to see how the other half lives. Yeah. Well, the last time that you were on the show, we talked about, I think, Captain Picard being on Facebook or Spacebook, and we talked about Trek's shaky relationship to computing and information science, and we also discussed what news and social media and data security might be like in the Federation, and perhaps in response to our discussion, those issues are being explored right now on Star Trek Picard.
Yeah, it's about time that we got our due, and they that they actually started talking about what we were talking about.
Yeah. I'd be fascinated to find out what, if it was a sci-fi show or what type of program, and not like a John Stossel thing, I mean like fiction programming, was the first to really start to try to integrate things like social media and sort of the digital landscape into their storytelling, because Trek made it to what, 2005? I think it was when, or 6 is when Enterprise went off?
Yeah, that sounds right.
And they still had, I mean, they were really detached, I think, at that point, but they had no plan to put email or anything into their storytelling. So if Trek was going to come back, especially if Trek was going to come back subsequent to TNG and the whole world of Berman Trek, they were going to have to do this someday, of course. And so I think that we are seeing now Trek as an institution, their take on the world that we're living in. You know, the series opens with news coverage of a disaster in the Federation and an interview with retired Admiral Picard. That's kind of a gotcha interview. That's, I'm assuming, trying to provoke views, you know, on the Federation news service or whatever, but also maybe, you know, of course, spark debate about the resulting synth ban that came in the wake of this disaster. You know, we also see a hacker character who uses whatever internet or network the Star Trek universe has to get information on people and to infiltrate systems. And we see targeted advertising when the crew goes to Freehold, a pleasure planet. Everybody has a literal pop-up ad that they have to get rid of that is
literally
tailored.
Swipe away.
Yes, that is tailored specifically to them. Yeah, even when you cancel it, it's not an X. Like, you have to play along. So if it's a boxer, you have to punch it. You know, if it's a bartender, you have to say, none more for me, thanks, or whatever. It's just like, I hope that Freehold operates outside of the Federation, because what a hellscape dystopia the Federation would be if those pop-up ads really exist in the Federation proper.
Yeah, I got the feeling that they were outside of the Federation, and I would actually hope, you know, like, I know there's no time to really get into that, but I would hope that a Federation citizen would have, like, a much more disturbed, like, reaction to that.
But everybody just seems like, well, there you go.
Yeah, like, oh, that thing again. Yeah, because, like, I think about, like, when I came back from my hippie college, like, over the summer, and went to my parents' house, and they had the TV turned on, and I hadn't had a running broadcast TV around me in like a year, and how jarring it was. Like, it was like just so, like, kind of disturbing, you know. It was just like, it's like yelling at you and telling you that you're ugly and that, you know, your dick is too small if you don't have this big truck or something like that, you know, like some really like gross stuff. And I was and I think about that, like, with, if you lived a whole life in the Federation where you're like, well, you know, my friends and I, we're in a Shakespeare troupe together, and what's my favorite song? I don't know, anything by Chopin. You know, it's like, you know, like these total nerds. You know, if they show up to a place like, I mean, even like Risa is like, as a pleasure planet, it's like, what you like you have like a statue that tells you that you're DTF. You know, like,
yeah, right, yeah,
you know, like that's like the most out there that planet is, with the exception of like some mild terrorism to destroy the
weather machine.
The weather machine. Yeah. You know, but then when you go to a place like Freehold, or is it
Free Cloud? Yeah.
Free Cloud. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which I was expecting to be like some sort of Matrix thing that you had to jack into, you know, like where, like, they would I mean, like, cloud, I'm thinking like in the cloud, but I guess it's just a place called Free Cloud. Anyway, I would think that it would be like almost impossible to handle, that you would just like
where's like the human meat on a stick, you know, the baby rape pavilion, and right,
it would just be so carnivalesque and disturbing that, like, that you wouldn't have to be like, like Baby on a Spit or something like that. It could just be like advertising. He's like, advertising is disturbing, and like it's in psychological torture, you know. And I guess I would have been more. I would expect Federation or ex-Federation citizens or whatever to like really be disturbed and startled by it more than like. I forgot the character's name. The doctor that ends up being kind of a double agent.
Girardi.
Yes, thank you. She's pretty much the only one that I think has a believable reaction to that, which is like, what is this? What do I do to it? And they're like, oh God, it's gross. You know, like that. That sort of grossed out, confused reaction is what I would expect someone to do in that case. But
yeah. Well, we were asking before on that previous episode, like what would Trek look like if it fully embraced the current technological and informational trends of our world, and maybe that's if you get the idea that Free Cloud is a place of a wretched hive of scum and villainy, if you will. So maybe the presumably benevolent data collecting and tracking of the Federation is what they're escaping. You go to do your death stick deal or whatever, and you don't want the Federation on your back. But then, of course, you have to put up with the relentless advertising and that sort of thing. But I like your point about you're leaving an anarchical society to go where exactly? Like, how are they going to be freer than what you're doing? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, full communism is the ultimate ad blocker.
Right, exactly. Yeah,
and once you're ensconced in that, you can. I imagine it's just so totally alien, pun intended, to experience anything other than that.
Yeah, and the fact that all the ads know exactly who you are and your predilections, it's like that's not really. Totally free.
Right, yeah. So that means they either have siphoned off information from some Federation database, or there's some instantaneous sensing that is going on that can deduce what will work best for you, right? Yeah. And then who knows what that is.
Maybe that's a vision then of data out of control, where the Federation's like, well, you didn't like us keeping tabs on you, but we weren't doing this, and this is what you get if you can do whatever. I liked your comment about Jurati too, and how she represents, I guess in this case, the least tempered or jaded character. Like she's Federation basic, and we do get to see. For the first time extended scenes on Earth. It wouldn't be much of a Star Trek if they didn't leave Earth, but I did like seeing some of the scenes on Earth and trying to get an idea of what the Federation is like, what the day-to-day life of a Federation citizen is like, because, of course, we always follow these explorers that are out in the middle of nowhere. And we didn't get to see all that much, but we did get some interesting kind of glimpse. Apparently, Boston's going to be great in the future. They've got that. They got that locked down. That looks awesome.
Wasn't expecting that. I'll be honest.
Yeah, although I was saying on another show that apparently there was. I guess baseball's back because in that long shot you see an advertisement for the London Kings, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is Boston, Sox. It's a Red Sox all the way.
Oh, I missed that. Yeah,
there's no way that they're going to, we might be enlightened individuals, but we'll still flip a hover car over baseball, so forget about it. But we have all these unanswered questions of, where is the automation and the application of AI? And of course, we're starting to see that. Of course, that's what Picard is about. And although to Star Trek, that's the same question. Synthetic life, or robots, I guess, and artificial intelligence are always united on Trek. You rarely see an artificial intelligence that doesn't have a physical, often human form.
Yeah. I think part of that might be user experience, for lack of a better term. You want to be around something that's human shaped rather than some terrifying multi-limbed thing that might actually be better at the job that you've assigned it to. Right. Or maybe it's an ergonomic issue where you want the world around the built environment around you to be ergonomically designed for it, some humanoid shape. And so if you make the things that help you also humanoid shaped, everything is shaped the way that is the most comfortable for an average humanoid. Maybe that's the thinking. Yeah. But I would also be a little weirded out that maybe this is why a lot of the synths that we've seen have this pallor to them that is definitely looks synthetic, is that maybe you want something that marks them as such so that it doesn't feel like you're barking orders at a something that's living, right? And that's at the center of so much of Data, Seven of Nine, the Doctor, and Odo plot lines is what is human and how can you or what they usually say human, and I think that that's pretty chauvinist, isn't it? But what's alive, and how should you treat it, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And when it comes to artificial life, I'm glad that we're focusing on that now in Picard, because there's some like exceptionally arbitrary ideas here where like the Federation seems to have no qualms with like essentially enslaving holograms, right? We say that in that episode of Voyager that's just like a throwaway where like there's a bunch of doctors working in dilithium mines or something, right?
Yeah,
and and they get like photons be free. They get the Hollow novel about like hologram liberation. And I was like, I really thought that that's where that was going to go. I'm a little disappointed that Picard did not go down the road of just like thousands of doctors like revolting. But I guess maybe I was asking too much. But I would imagine that there's something out there that where the Federation just like eventually like really comes down on like the decision of like is synthetic life? Does it have rights? And like, can you just like revoke that instantly? The way it seems that they have been. Yeah. That doesn't seem right at all.
Well, it in the sort of, and I use this term positively, but in the moralizing sort of world of TOS and all the Berman Trek, it's always a move up. The arc bends towards justice, that sort of thing. And in this sort of modern storytelling, it's like it's got to be kind of edgy, and so maybe things aren't going that way, and maybe things can regress. And Berman Trek era stories, whenever they're telling stories about AI, they're generally stories about just recognizing it as alive and sentient, period. How it's the new life that the Enterprise is supposed to be seeking out, but we're missing it in our own backyard. But, Picard has that more sort of cynical look at it, and we're back to the rise of the robots, which is weird because anybody who's a TNG fan and is familiar with Data has no problem accepting synthetic beings as being alive. We watch one every week on the show, but apparently the Federation hasn't seen TNG because they're just subjugating synths up in here. Like they're solely an underclass. It's like nobody listened to Guinan at all.
Yeah. Or it's almost like they're creating like a they're like, well, Data's different. He breaks all the stereotypes. He's a well-behaved synth, but in general, like the rest of them are just like, you can't trust him. I don't know. It's that's the only way that I can parse that as, or if there's like some sort of grandfather clause. Because then like also why do they cover this? Like why does this ship have like a holographic crew?
Oh boy.
Isn't that against this like synth thing? There seems to be a very, very strange arbitrary dividing line between like physical synthetic life and digital like projected holographic synthetic life. And I don't understand where like why. I don't understand why.
Yeah, well, it's even that same idea that I said before of like having an intelligent mind and then having like a real body, be it flesh or metal or hologram, is like that's the only way that Trek can even think about this.
Right.
Like, it's like at the end of TNG, this Enterprise achieves self-awareness, but it's in this weird way where it builds like a weird slinky thing that then flies off and everything's fine. Yeah, but the Enterprise is like this amazingly powerful computer that could totally be alive. And in other sci-fi shows, we see like people talk to the ship and the ship is alive or it's controlled by an AI or something like that. But like, I don't know if it's just if Gene Roddenberry just hated like talking computers or self-aware robots or something, but Trek has just never really done this until really now. Like they've taken this one episode, which is a great episode, The Measure of the Man, and just made it like the basis for at least one season of their entirely new series. And I don't know, like your mileage might vary as to what they're really accomplishing. I mean, media and fiction that we make is always preoccupied with the issues that we currently face. And I don't know, it's possible that with many of us talking every day to Alexa or Siri or having interactions with machine intelligence, even if it's not sentient, that affects our sci-fi. Like both Picard and Disco Season 2 both deal with AI, and they're these kind of rise of the robot scenarios, which, like I said, I find kind of regressive. You know, the idea that Commander Data has been around for 30 years, is an accomplished Starfleet officer. Sure, he's on the Enterprise a lot, but he's talked to other people, met people, been to conferences and stuff. You know, Trek fans are okay with synthetic life, but once again, we have to go into the all humans must die shtick with our storytelling on Picard.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it is true that we can always regress as a society, right?
Yeah.
I think we're finding that now in IRL, that like if we make some sort of accomplishment in the realm of tolerance, like we don't just always automatically keep it. It has to be maintained, and so it can be interesting to dwell on that. But I ultimately agree that I feel like there's just something, and Trek is the perfect vehicle for this, to like just think about something else about autonomous life that isn't like they'll take our jobs or they want to kill us at all costs because they're more perfect than us or whatever.
I was thinking that Data literally has ethical subroutines that like keep him from doing anything bad. Like, I don't want the word Uncle Tom to come out in the air, but like he literally has to kind of do what we say. But like real freedom for a synthetic life form would be somebody like Soji in Picard, who presumably doesn't have that and is just free to do whatever, good or bad.
Yeah, and doesn't even like. I guess there's like some control mechanism on the fact that she doesn't fully understand her powers, and I think there is some writing. There's written into it like, oh man, once she does find out what, they mention, like she's been activated or she, like in those moments they're like, oh, now she's dangerous because she knows what she is. Right. And what she is inherently dangerous. Right. Like, right. If I could put on, media critic hat for a second. Sure. Yeah. I do feel like that Picard is taking on maybe too many, too many storylines in like what 12, like a dozen episodes or something. Yeah, I feel like like we're grabbing a bunch of different stuff all at once. Where like if this could just be 12 episodes on Measure of Man, like that, I would be totally fine with that. It's one big rich question that I would be explore from all different angles.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see just 10 episodes on the malaise of like the 25th century Federation. Like, you mentioned the fact that it's just gone up and up and up, and we want to believe that. In a lot of disgruntled fans, like, complaints have been about the fact that the Federation isn't as shiny and happy as it's been in the past. But of course, this series was created like in the middle of the Great Society, and just believing that government is a positive force, and we're going up and up and up. And it's funny that it took until this decade, for disillusionment to become so widespread and like baked into our interaction with politics that we're willing to dirty up the Federation and present a world where it's like, maybe it's not that great.
Yeah, or that there's always some sort of malignant force within the good thing, right? There's always corruption that brings down this perfect society, right? That would otherwise be perfect.
Oh my God, Q. Just thinking about politically, there's Q, and then we've got Q in Star Trek. Maybe that's why they haven't brought back Q.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. There's a lot of wires crossed on that one.
Yeah.
I to get back to what you were saying about like we see Earth for a refreshingly long period of time in Picard. Yeah. I always love it when Star Trek goes to Earth, because on the one hand, the new life and new civilizations may be the friends we made along the way, and so it's like all of that cool stuff is maybe there's infinite amount of things we could look at on Earth, but then there's also like all these moments where that are mostly throwaways. Like, why does Picard's dad have a restaurant? What do you do with a restaurant when there's no money? Like, is it just like a hobby?
Right.
Like, do you just like do it to pass the time? And like, I think when you think about like what like these scientists are doing on Earth, it does obviously seem like passion projects. But speaking as an academic, like I wonder what there's still like tons of maladaptive forces at work to like be the first to publish and like hurt other people in the process. And I always wonder if that's still at play here, because like in Berman Star Trek, like half the time that there's a character not on screen, they're like, oh, they're at a conference, they're like just everyone's always at conferences, and that would probably not be how I would spend my life if if I didn't have to work for a living.
Yeah, you could have a free Corvette, and right.
Yeah. So I think it would be interesting to find out like, how are these people acting absent on Earth, absent all of the forces that make you work all the time. Maybe you'd go to conferences, but like maybe you'd open a restaurant, but you're also an astrophysicist.
Possibly, yeah. This is way off the beaten path, but I was thinking about too the emotional limiters or limitations that must exist in a society where you mentioned people being rivals. I saw a DS9 episode recently where it's the baseball one where Cisco reveals that this Vulcan captain they're playing baseball against.
Oh, take me out to the Hollow Suite.
Yeah.
It's so good.
They've
death to the opposition.
Yeah, right. They've had a 25-year rivalry over this wrestling match they had in college. And so this guy's published like 15 academic papers, and every paper, the first part, it opens with him explaining why Vulcans are superior because he won this wrestling match. And, you wouldn't have to kill somebody over that, but I could see somebody killing somebody over that eventually.
Oh, absolutely.
But they're
allowed. I mean, like growing up in Florida, you just see like how humans act once they're retired.
You just stab somebody.
Yeah. Well, no. They're like always in condo association meetings trying to get one over the other. Yes. Over like a $400 landscaping
fee.
Right,
and presumably that never accelerates to stabbing, and that's good. So maybe the Federation is just a galaxy-wide condo associating meeting. Yeah. But just for some reason, whatever it is, presumably the murders are very low. People still get angry with each other, and they still are contentious over all kinds of things. But it just never progresses to a felonious point. There's, we were talking about Picard, and we're talking about the idea of the synths, who we learn as the series goes on. The self-aware synths are on this like hidden planet. They've gone into hiding because of this ban. Presumably the ban would also, affect them, not just the new production of synths, but like, I don't know, they would round up the already living synths and get rid of them. We never really get into it. And perhaps it's too horrible to contemplate. But then, the implication is that they're going to try to fight back, and we hear tales of, a force that is out there ready to protect them if something was wrong. And so it's just, are you familiar with the video game series Mass Effect?
Vaguely, but I haven't played it.
Yeah, but it's very similar to kind of the core story of Mass Effect, which is if biological life will always go beyond creating more of itself and create life in its own image, synthetic life, and what happens when that happens. And there are some weird parallels. Maybe Michael Chabon is a video game fan, but there's some weird parallels between Mass Effect and Picard. So it's just like this is why you're always nice to a nascent artificial intelligence, because what's going to happen in the future? That's how you get around Rocco's basilisk. I was always on your side. Or you can use reverse psychology on the AI. If you tell Skynet that, we sure hate candy and puppies, once the robopocalypse hits, boom, unlimited candy and puppies, right? Checkmate. It's the Brer Rabbit stratagem.
Yeah, I would co-sign both of those. And it's also why, I actually kind of take seriously, and I've written about very briefly a couple times, this, how we talk to those virtual assistants like Siri and Alexa.
Yes.
What we're what we're satisfying in our own desires when we yell at these assistants, because right, he's like who or what sort of role is something like Siri and Alexa like designed around, right? It's like this image of a personal assistant, and like who, and so like, oh, okay, well, who gets personal assistants is a very raced, classed, and gendered idea, right? And coming, which it should be no surprise that like some of the first the first version of Siri and Alexa like have female voices, right? And you just like bark at them, and they're supposed to be very polite and deferential. While on the flip side, when you hear a computer that has a masculine voice, whether it's been programmed with a masculine voice, it's usually supposed to be a source of authority. And you can even see that in the New York City subway, where there are two automated voices. There's one that tells you the station you're arriving at, and that's in a feminine voice. Okay. That is because it's being helpful. It's telling you what place you're arriving at. But then there's a masculine voice that tells you the rules and what to do, and like the door is closing and stuff like that. I think it's very fascinating. And when Watson, the IBM computer that beat contestants at Jeopardy, like back in like 2012 or something, I went to a talk by some of the people that were designing it, and this little girl gets to come up to the microphone to ask a question. And it's a very precious moment, and she goes, "Is Watson a girl?"
Okay.
And this engineer goes, "No, it's a man. It has a man's voice because when we tested it out, users found a feminine voice grating." Or something like that. He said something like that, and everyone's like, just the whole room of like hundreds of people just start groaning. Or it's like this girl is like 8,
right?
Sit down. You shouldn't have said that. You shouldn't have said that to an adult. But like, this is a kid. Like, what the hell's wrong with you, dude?
Yeah.
And like, that's like, I feel like that is still like a big part of like computer science. In fact, like computer science peaked in like women in computer science in like the late 70s, early 80s. It's like the most women have ever been in computer science. It's only gone down since. There's still something real fishy going around in the actual artificial intelligence world, and then I think that then sort of comes back at us in a reverse way in our television or fiction also, because we're either reflecting on it and doing the opposite, and like just looking at interesting topics like a robot that doesn't know it's a robot, or we're just sort of reifying it and doing it even more and following it to its illogical conclusions, and it's all very, very strange.
That poor girl, but I love it. It's like the pure sexism of the graph. Do you know what I mean? The guy just says, the data we got is that people don't like the girl voice. So I'm not trying to be sexist. Check your societal bias or your societal sexism on this one. But yeah, that's so weird. We see more holographic people in Picard. We see these kind of tour guides or assistant AIs, and we see. I'm calling him an AI. It could just be a representation of a computer. Yeah, and we see, of course, Rios has his, frankly, troubling amount of holographic crew members. And I'm
they all look exactly like him.
Yeah, they all look like him, which again, is psychologically troubling.
With different accents.
I think that's just troubling generally. I think I'm starting to understand the Federation's problem in this, though, in respecting people like the Doctor or things that aren't like physical things that they can touch, is that maybe empathy is ultimately a finite resource. Like you mentioned, you get so used to yelling at, a talking trash can or a non-self-aware EMH or a hologram in their world, or those characters in the pop-up ads, somebody pops up, hey, have some snake juice. And it's like, yeah, screw you. But then you have to turn around and be nice to, and you have to respect a holographic life form. In theory, it should be easy because Federation citizens are always interacting with people of all different colors and things on their forehead and whatever. But maybe they're just using these empathetic resources all the time and then having to turn around and see a hologram that, no, remember, it's like, I don't know, maybe this is like controversial, but like, it's like respecting somebody's pronouns. You know, it's like something that would be so easy for you to do, but you're like, why do I have to call this person they now instead of him or her or whatever?
Right. Yeah, that's a fascinating parallel, but also the idea of like limited empathy. You know, I'm not a social psychologist, so I don't know a lot about that, but there is definitely like a mutual shaping of the object and the user that's going on in like a interaction with Alexa, but then also that of course gets complicated in really interesting ways in the Star Trek universe, where you're walking around all the time negotiating social interactions, and then when you are either unaware that something is a machine or not, you have to always default to something.
Yeah.
Right. If you don't know, right, and that default is usually, if you're a functioning person in a society, right, is generally politeness. Yeah. But there's actually really interesting stuff that happens when you are too polite to someone that that you should be familiar with, and that was something that Erving Goffman found out, early sociologist that noticed that like it was terrible to be Erving Goffman's students, because he would do what are called breaching experiments and would enlist his students to do them. So there would be ones that like eventually make it into stuff like in like Candid Camera and stuff. There's actually a Candid Camera skit that is actually a Goffman research
really?
project,
Wow.
one of these breaching experiments, where you walk into an elevator and stand with your back to the door.
Okay, all right.
Right, in a crowded elevator, right? And everyone immediately gets uncomfortable, right? Because the experiment that reveals that you are breaching a unspoken social norm, right? That you face the door in the elevator. But then you can do more complicated stuff like with politeness, where he instructed like his students to go back to like their family homes, and in the morning treat your parents like they are a stranger that has taken you in, and you have to be polite to them, right? Okay. So like you go down to the breakfast table and say like, "Oh wow, this bacon is delicious. Thank you so much." And like, "May I have some coffee?" And so you ask for a lot of things, and maybe you ask to be excused when that's usually not the etiquette. And the reaction that was most often reported was anger, was like violent anger. Because misplaced politeness or too much politeness gets read quite often as sarcastic.
Yeah.
Or you're essentially communicating that we don't have a strong relationship, and so we have to default back to norms.
Right.
The default to norms means that we don't have any sort of pre-existing relationship. So, when it comes to interacting with robots, right, you could actually be seen as impolite by acting polite to a robot, right? Because then you're treating them like an automaton and not like a sentient being, right? You imagine if like, or it could be vice versa, right? You know, where like if you have to bark orders at like the replicator to make the correct chocolate sundae, right? Yeah. Then like you go talk to a sentient being, right. But then you go talk to a sentient being that is synthetic, and you treat it the same way. You're saying, "Oh, you are like a replicator." Yeah, right.
And Federation citizens presumably use holodecks and holograms every single day. So they're
very used to talking to both things on different levels of sentience, whether they be like born or created. And like I imagine there's actually exceptionally complicated etiquettes around that. So, and then on top of all that, like different societies and different cultures from different planets.
Yeah, I think for that reason, the Doctor would have an even more difficult time making a case for his existence than Data would. Not having a body, we've discussed, and the holographic sort of people's familiarity with how they interact with holograms, but if he's literally tailor-made for a specific purpose. He's sharing, somebody else's specifications. In this case, Louis Zimmerman. He's mass-produced. He's effectively owned by Starfleet, be it the patents or the software or the equipment that generates him. And then you've got, like you said, this problem of, you can go to your holodeck and you can be nice to the character who you're supposed to be nice to and kiss the character you're supposed to kiss or whatever, and then you just turn it off and it's fine. But this is almost like a her situation. If you found out that your daughter was dating the doctor, it's like, wait, what? You're dating a holodeck character? No, he's not a holodeck character. He's alive. It's complicated. Yeah, if Data is like literally an alien, like he was built on another planet and he was built uniquely by this weirdo who, did Dr. Soong ever share any of his findings or his research with the rest of the Federation?
Yeah,
like,
right.
He's just this kook that made these robots and then he died. Yeah. And if he thinks Data's special, sure, it can be abused, and we're seeing this in Picard, but he's like literally robbing like the rest of the galaxy of more Datas, who definitely enrich the lives of people that he served with. So I don't know. He's just a weirdo. But yeah, that's what I was thinking about her a lot in this, in that like, okay, so we've got a white-faced robot, we've got a mean holographic doctor, but like, what about like a phone or just something that talks to you through a phone? We never see something like that in Star Trek.
Yeah, I mean, we do get like, right, we get like the ship's computer that you talk to all the time, but even that is, like that's very cut and dry and straightforward. It's not, there's no sort of emotional valence to that relationship.
Yeah.
This was also making me think of, and maybe this will explain to some people why you're talking to someone in an urban planning department about this, is that the Federation often reminds me of like how you have to act in a city, because as we were just talking about, like all the different levels of politeness and etiquette that you would need to develop in order to navigate everyday life in the Federation, where you have people coming from all different planets, and some people were built and some people were born, and that could very quickly start feeling like a pronoun check, right? Or just like how dare you assume that I was built, I was born, right? Sure. Like this could all or vice versa, right? Yeah, these could all be things that could have very real ramifications, either in interpersonal relationships or how other people see you as like a caring individual who actually looks at this stuff or not, right, and respects it. And that's in urban sociology we would call that cosmopolitanism, right, where people who live in cities have to develop all sorts of social cues and etiquettes and what have you to navigate a world where there is assumed to be diversity, essentially, right? And you have to be ready to interact with people who do not share your the norms that you were born with or something like that. And so what it usually ends up being, what that usually turns into, is like a deference to diversity and a celebration of it in a fairly I don't want to say shallow, but aesthetic way, in that we're you just assume that we're getting along to get along, and we don't have to really interrogate difference too much, so long as I can have a economic exchange with you, or we could be acquaintances or friends with like weak ties, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So and so I imagine the Federation is like this like cosmopolitanism on steroids, right? You have to like really. And of course, I don't think it would be very fun to watch as a show if if we were really tried to be social scientists and figure out like what interaction like that would be like, because it would probably like make no sense, where like people would just like have like and which also sort of reveals like how bad our coping mechanisms are for stuff like that, right? Because I respect everyone's pronouns. I think it's totally fine to ask for them at the beginning of a meeting or something like that. I don't want to go anywhere like that at all. But it is, I do want to think though, like, we would spend 10 minutes at the beginning of every conversation, like queuing all these different questions, like what pronouns do you use, what were you born or built, and so on and so on and so forth. And so I think that really all that I bring that up is to point toward, like, there's got to be some other sort of sociality where we can do that in an economy of time, where we can this sort of new cosmopolitanism where identity can be projected in a way that lets us get to the act of, just talking and, like, getting out what we want to get out. That doesn't involve, like, a series of questions and stuff. And I have no idea what that looks like, but I also don't think we've done a really good job of thinking through that either. Yeah. Because I think we already came up with these already, like, fine systems of, like, asking clarification on pronouns and stuff, and that works, but it doesn't seem to scale, I think, is the ultimate problem. Is that, like, I don't know how properly that's going to scale in this sort of thought experiment that we're going through.
Yeah, and it's not something that I think that Trek has ever really tasked itself with exploring. I mean, they've only recently introduced non-heterosexual characters to the show. Yeah. So hopefully,
and that would be so interesting to look at. Because, like, there was, like, something really queer about Dax, for example, right? Where you just, like, in the 90s, there's, like, a black guy calling a white lady old man, like that.
Yeah, whoa.
yeah, like, that's pretty wild. And I think that might have been the apogee, like, the apex of like how weird we could get with gender and identity in Star Trek, because now like Discovery finally has, like, at least one gay couple, but but there's still, like, something. I would love us to try to tackle these questions of, like, in a first contact situation, like, how do you use gendered language, or how do you work out stuff like these things that could be really rude in an unintentional way that just doesn't get brushed off with, like, the universal translator figures all that out for us.
Right, yeah.
Like, that's
Which
boring.
Is, that's the instinct. I don't think that it's antithetical to Trek to explore this stuff, though. In the very first episode, the unaired pilot, The Cage, you've got female actresses playing aliens using male voices, and it's like, isn't that weird? I think that, like, it's there. We just have to want to pursue that. There's a book series that I always bring up on the show. I don't think I've actually done it yet this year, by Ian M. Banks, and it's called The Culture series. And The Culture is sort of a Federation analog, and in The Culture, people don't really live on planets. They live on ships and habitats and orbitals. And so when you meet somebody, they have, like, a 13-word long name that tells you kind of everything about them, including things that they pick just for fun, or you could learn, things about, like, their gender or, like, the orientation, where they come from, which I thought was interesting. They don't go by those every day. They have, like, shorter, like, nicknames, familiar names. And then there are also drones in their society, and they have gone way past the singularity of, like, yeah, whatever. Like, drones are alive. There's some that aren't, but there are plenty of machine intelligences, and they communicate because they don't have necessarily eyes, hands, gestures, and microexpressions. They communicate with colored fields, basically, that you just grow up in the culture. You've got a friend that's a drone. You know what those emotional expressions mean, depending on the shape or color of the field. And so, it just, like, Trek is just, I love Trek, but it's just so... It's so basic, you know what I mean? It's just still guys climbing into rockets, blasting off into outer space for America. And there's just so many things that you could do. And I think we're running into a thing now where maybe we're trying to put some of that in, and people are like, well, this isn't Trek. And it's like, yeah, but I mean, I think Trek has proven that Trek can be a lot of things here.
Yeah. And what was that also, that episode where Riker has a love interest with a race of... with someone from a race that doesn't have gender, right? And they're, like, asking questions like, "What's a penis like?" Like,
sure,
yeah. And I actually remember Frakes requested that the person that play that character be a man, so that he could act in a way that would make him feel, like, kind of uncomfortable, and that because he's a heterosexual man, and it was like, and they wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
And so I think there's always been this, and I think that's also why, like, you know, number one in The Cage, right, the episode you were talking about, right, like that got canned because that, like, they didn't think audiences
a woman on the
were
bridge
ready
made
for
people
that.
uncomfortable. Yeah.
So there's like all this stuff that, you know, the Star Trek is always like pushing against what they think audiences will accept, and I think most of the time they're underestimating their audience a lot of the time.
For sure.
You know, but of course, I would also expect, you know, like maybe this circles back to the beginning of our conversation is, you know, the profit motive of, like, you know, CBS or Paramount, you know, that has to think like, well, we have to play conservative here because we're putting a bunch of money into this, and if everyone's offended and doesn't watch it, then like that's gonna suck.
That's true.
But also now,
yeah,
you know, like being offensive draws attention. And it makes you a thing that people talk about, and then more people watch it.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, that's basically how our president got elected. So,
well,
I wonder if it does work in the opposite direction. I kind of wish it did.
Yeah. I think it does sometimes, though, because, you know, Discovery features a female protagonist. It features parody with female characters, if not a majority of female characters. And I think that that does exist in the form of businesses being, and I use this ironically, performatively woke, you know, realizing that we don't have to just take 18 to 35-year-old males' money. Let's take 18 to 35-year-old females' money, too. And I don't know, if the revolution begins with corporations just wanting to get everybody's money, it's still a revolution, I guess.
Yeah, the performative wokeness of companies is usually, I'm comfortable in saying always, you know, run by some sort of profit motive, and like just like looking for more people's money to take. It's not necessarily always earnest. At the same time, I would also just like really, it would be so cool if Star Trek could do something as innovative as like the culture like you were describing, which then also brings in something about like, because like we were thinking about this at our conference, like whether or not we should have like name badges that have like your preferred pronouns on them. Mm-hmm. And we thought about it and we're really receptive to that, but we ended up not doing it as sort of maybe it's too academic of a reason, but it was mostly because like that seems to be sort of like using kind of the logics of social media in physical space. Like you're substituting some sort of social solidarity with like a badge on you, and then it's like, well, like how many different things are you going to wear on yourself to communicate who you are before you start talking? Like there should be maybe something else that we put together, and like when you're talking about like a name that communicates like so much about your identity, I feel like we could also do something in Star Trek with like maybe not wearing something, but something digital or something that follows you, some sort of whether it's physical or you know, like shows up on a tricorder phone thing, you know, like I could say so many more interesting cool things, and I'm not creative enough to make that compelling television.
Just some sort of like RFID
something
thing.
Happen there. Yeah.
It's interesting that you bring that up because there's already so much information being communicated just with them being in the military and wearing the insignia of rank and also you know the color of their uniforms and stuff like that. I know one thing. I know that I need to change my digital assistant voice to a male's voice because I get really mad at my stupid inefficient Google Assistant and yell at it quite a bit. I've probably done more searching for profanity than actual search terms when I OK Google, so I better make sure that I'm it's turning on right now. I better make sure I'm doing that honestly to a man and not just a female voice. As we wrap up here, I just wanted to mention that I think the idea that the Federation could have got to the place where it is, a place of abundance, without artificial intelligence and computing or even automation in manufacturing or day-to-day labor is unbelievable. Yeah, and we rarely ever see that on screen. We're starting to see it now in Picard, some automation in the form of like we see vineyard equipment like sprayers that could be termed robots that operate independently. And of course, we see the synths being used on Mars, presumably to do dangerous work. But we get no indication, at least I didn't, that the synths have a true self-awareness, nor do we see intelligent, or intelligent computing or AI in just the day-to-day workings of the world and the glimpses that we see of Earth.
Yeah. I think, like the Marxist in me, which is most of me, will, say that, all value comes from labor, right? And in the Star Trek
honesty
universe,
of work, yes.
Yeah, right. All value of society, whether you measure it in money or credits or gold press latinum or whatever, right? That all comes from labor at some point. And and if it's the labor of synthetic life, like that, that throws a wrench in a whole bunch of stuff. He's like, what do you owe these entities that can be manufactured?
I could totally believe that a Federation citizen would be like, no, I want this to be from the sweat of my brow. But when it comes to building like superstructures or putting together a galaxy class ship, I mean, you're gonna need to program something to do that for you, some drones or something. And maybe
there's no hobbyists making starships.
No, definitely not. And maybe all the real work is behind the scenes. And we don't see it because it's not drama. It doesn't make up the drama that we see on the screen. But I was wondering about the idea of what we would think of as a technological singularity and what it looks like for in their world. We think about the singularity as being like, the Ray Kurzweil singularity is like, whoa, you don't even know what life's going to be like on the other side of this. But in the other discussions that I've had on this show or on social media or seen on social media, about the future of Star Trek, everyone that I talk to is convinced that the moneyless society, the socialist society of the Federation, is totally impossible and a fantasy. And so maybe for us, like, that's the real singularity, or at least an economic singularity. AI and automation has allowed them to achieve this thing that we can't even wrap our minds around and just scoff at. And they're still, they have that, and they're wearing weird asymmetrical hemmed polyester clothes too.
I have to, for myself, keep believing that it's possible.
Yeah.
And I think it does actually useful work if you act, or like you live your life thinking that it is possible. There's like, I'm a cynic in the short term, but an optimist in the long run. I really do think that's how you have to. How I have to live my life. Maybe I won't tell other people how to live theirs, but that's why ultimately I keep coming back to Star Trek. Is that like it's a story that we tell ourselves about ourselves that that could be important. That could be really important.
And you can hear all about that on the Ironweeds podcast.
Yes, you can.
Well, thanks so much for joining me today, and I'm sorry for taking you on such a meandering path in our conversation, but there's just...
that's every conversation I have, and I love it. Thank you.
There's so many things to discuss, and there's so many ways that informatics just reaches into our current world, so thanks for going along with me.
No, thank you.
Remind people where they can find you online.
Oh, sure. There's my website, davidabanks.org, where everything that I do kind of like ends up on there somewhere. And I'm on Twitter at DA_Banks. And I've started to do some Twitch stuff. And that's DA Banks, no underscore. The one with the underscore was taken.
Sure.
That's and Ironweeds. And that's Ironweeds is all over the place. Instagram, Twitter, and wherever you get your podcasts. Just search Ironweeds and you'll find us.
Awesome. Well, thanks again.
Yeah, thank you.
How would you describe Just Enough Trope? We are the Just Enough Trope podcast. I'm your host, Caliban, joined as always by my co-host.
Hi, I'm Mikan Hana.
Oh no, does this mean they can hear all the things I yell at the TV during Downton Abbey?
Why did you do that?
How do you plead?
Let the game begin.
Yeah, check these fresh moves.
Oh!
Don't shoot man in face.
This isn't the Save Gotham fundraiser.
It's the Chill Family Reunion.
Master Yoda assigned a Padawan to this bold Jedi.
I think it's pronounced Padawan.
Oh, Padawan, excuse me.
Hey, it's getting late. I think Ralph's going to want his motorcycle back.
Go jerk off the pictures of Jean Grey.
I am freaking getting old.
Yeah, I noticed the life clock was blinking in your hand.
Get out of here, Wilson. Go fight the Teen Titans or something.
I'm unkillable, not unwoundable.
You like Sailor Moon, right? Why don't you sail on this
Wow.
Just Enough Trope. News, reviews, and geek fondue. Every Monday on the Just Enough Trope Podcast Network.
Loving me never have a say you sorry.
What?